I'm Liz Faublas, and this is Currents. While President Obama attends the National Prayer Breakfast, tonight we are getting the first hints of how the U.S. bishops view his latest demands upon religious liberty. The President and First Lady were welcomed by 3,000 people at the breakfast. Mr. Obama used the occasion to call for unity, asking the nation's leaders to come together under the leadership example of Jesus. He also made a plea for humility to help heal the often fractious tone of American politics, probably having in mind the fierce debate over religious freedom brought on by his so-called HHS mandate. The chief spokeswoman for the U.S. Bishops' Conference is reacting to the latest version of the president's plan. Sister Marianne Walsh is writing that the new proposal does not, quote, completely satisfy concerns related to religious rights of conscience. The White House put out the updated version last week, intending to quiet criticism from Catholics and other religious leaders. The mandate is actually an order by the government demanding that abortion-causing drugs and other contraceptives be provided regardless of religious faith or beliefs. The official response by America's bishops is still awaited. Well, the mandate grows out of the new Obamacare health law. Also about to grow because of Obamacare, your grocery bill by about $1 billion a year. Due to the new law, supermarkets now have to put new labels on most everything in the store. Profit margins for grocers are razor thin, so you will pay the $1 billion bill in higher food prices. Well, among those least able to bear the higher food costs are the men and women who bear arms to protect our country. Their paychecks, already thin, are about to shrink even more. The Secretary of Defense is the man with the bad news.
Thank you. The troops usually are happy to see Defense Secretary Leon Panetta smiles and handshakes all around. But days before he leaves office, Panetta has bad news. He's proposing less money in their paycheck next year. Panetta, a savvy Washington operative in budget politics, is leaving it to Congress to figure out how not to cut pay and keep thousands of defense employees on the job.
We will furlough as many as 800,000 DoD civilians around the country for up to 22 days. They could face a 20% cut in their salary. You don't think that's going to impact on our economy?
But the recommendation to slow the military pay raise will put troops in the middle of that political fight between Congress and the president over spending.
He should be looking out for soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that he sends into harm's way.
Panetta is proposing just a 1% increase in troop pay for 2014. According to internal Pentagon calculations, it should have been at least 1.7%, which was the increase this year. It may not be a huge deduction, but it's badly needed cash for strapped military families. For a junior enlisted service member with 2 years in uniform, the basic pay is about $1,500 a month. Panetta's recommendation would mean about $130 less pay than planned. One official familiar with the plan says, quote, it's a pay cut, no matter how it's explained. Panetta, in his last major speech, did not hold back his concern about Congress failing to reach a deal on spending.
This is not a game. This is reality. These steps would seriously damage a fragile American economy, and they would degrade our ability to respond to crisis precisely at a time of rising instability across the globe.
Mr. Panetta's successor, Chuck Hagel, is awaiting Senate confirmation. Well, when the Secretary talks about instability, he's referring to political and military matters. Here in our area, however, 2 massive storms are headed our way and may, in the next few hours, give us very unstable weather. Predictions for snow in our town range from just an inch to more than 20. That's right, almost 2 feet of snow. This time of year, early February, is a time for unstable weather throughout the Northeast, that is. In fact, 35 years ago yesterday, forecasters were looking at a storm expecting only a few inches of snow. Instead, all of us got something more.
On February 6, 1978, people weren't warned of a blizzard. At the time, a snow watch was issued, a relatively common warning in New England. Forecasting back then wasn't easy, though. There were no fancy computer models. In fact, no computers at all.
In 1978, first of all, if you walked into a weather office, It was a very classic sound. That was the click-clacking of the teletypes.
The National Weather Service predicted 6 inches of snow, but New England got walloped. 25 inches in Boston. Some places got 4.5 feet of snow. Sounds familiar to forecast this week? Well, there are some similarities, but don't expect the same outcome.
The 78 blizzard stalled for quite a while. This storm too looks like it may stall, but instead of stalling for 2 to 3 days, it may be more in the order of 12 to 24 hours.
Today there are more accurate forecasts thanks to better technology and years of studying weather patterns.
We were relying upon fax machines where we'd get printed, often fuzzy, copies of maps, and not nearly the fields or the different levels that we have now. So I think probably most of my staff would probably have a heart attack if suddenly they were brought back to the technology 35 years ago.
Also, the response is better. More tow trucks on the road and a better working relationship between forecasters and first responders.
It really comes down to being able to communicate the impacts.
We should feel the impact of the new storm sometime tomorrow. As for tonight, up next, the Pope about to make a new journey. Details as Currents continues. Welcome back. The Islamic summit in Cairo has split wide open over Syria while Christians pray for peace in the war-torn country. The hardline Islamist who runs Egypt is condemning Syria's Bashar al-Assad, while the head of Iraq is being supportive. The Syrian Assad is locked in a civil war with rebels being led by al-Qaeda. In Jerusalem, meantime, Christians are coming to the Basilica of St. Stephen to pray for the Syrian people and for the restoration of peace in their land. Since the civil war started almost 2 years ago, more than 60,000 people have been killed. Another 2.5 million have fled their homes. New fighting is being reported tonight on the streets of Damascus, the battles in the capital being called the worst since last summer. A leading Christian, the Anglican Bishop of Jerusalem, says people of faith cannot be silent witnesses to the brutality now underway in Syria. Loud protests tonight in Tunis, the aftermath of yesterday's assassination of an anti-Islamist leader. Chakri Belaid was gunned down as he organized opposition to the rule of the Islamists. The so-called Arab Spring, now being called the Islamist Winter, started in Tunisia 2 years ago. Seeming to take advantage of the shooting, the Islamist ruler of the country has fired the cabinet, but those politicians are ignoring him. Further turmoil in Tunisia is expected. A new pilgrimage by Pope Benedict is now being planned. The Holy Father will journey to Bulgaria next year. He's accepted an invitation from the Atlantic Club. Their mission is to improve relations between the West and China. The exact date of the trip is not yet set. Meantime, at the Vatican, a controversy tonight over same-sex marriage and the words of a top church official. A statement directed against discrimination is being called something else by those trying to twist an archbishop's argument.
As the issue of same-sex marriage makes international headlines, many senior Vatican officials have been asked to comment on their stance on marriage and the family. But recently, it seems that some answers have been taken out of context. Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia is the president of the Pontifical Council for the Family. In light of the controversy, he reiterated his solidarity with French and English bishops for taking a stand against same-sex marriage. But some news agencies ran stories claiming that Paglia was actually in favor of it. The Archbishop says his comments were, quote, derailed. During a press conference, he said the Church in general opposes any unfair discrimination, including that of homosexuals. He was asked if the Church supports any type of gay unions other than marriage, like civil unions or common law rights. The Archbishop made a clear distinction. He said the individual rights of all people must be respected. But when it comes to marriage, he said the actual institution of marriage cannot be recognized simply because of strong emotional ties. He added that alternative legal measures, not marriage, could be considered.
Io sono d'accordo che bisogna evitare ogni discriminazione. Secondo me all'interno dell'attuale codice sia civile che patrimoniale si possono trovare quelle soluzioni che in effetti fanno, di cui bisogna tener conto, sia a livello patrimoniale sia a livello di facilitazione della vita per impedire anche ingiustizie dei più deboli. Bisogna ragionare, ecco, io questo risottolineo, insomma. Però all'interno di quella prospettiva del diritti individuali e diritti privati.
In recent months, other comments of senior Vatican officials have also been misrepresented, oftentimes reducing their answers to a simple condemnation of same-sex marriage. Even the words of the Pope have been misinterpreted, creating confusion.
No confusion tonight over the words from the cardinal in charge of the Vatican Supreme Court. Cardinal Raymond Burke, an American serving in Rome, is telling priests that communion should not be given to any politician who supports abortion. The cardinal is speaking directly to Ireland, where he says the political push to legalize abortion will create a culture of death and jeopardize the country's future. Cardinal Burke's role as head of the Supreme Court, the Apostolic Signatura, makes him the supreme authority on justice in the Church apart from the Pope. The Holy Father's personal theologian is another authority Benedict relies on. Now that priest describes to us what he calls the Pope's most important discourse ever.
The most important discourse that I think that Pope Benedict XVI gave in his pontificate was the discourse he gave in December 2005 to the Roman Curia, where he said that we need to read the Second Vatican Council in a hermeneutic of continuity. Now, it happens sometimes in culture, in certain cultural contexts, that certain issues are misunderstood because the meaning of words changes, because new questions have arisen, because there is a wider historical geographical perception, because the sciences have moved on and discovered certain things. And so there is seemingly a conflict between the teaching of the Church and the social context. And so the Church, in some sense, has to step back and look more in depth and reread the tradition which is transmitted from the time of the apostles, and maybe reformulate it in a way so as not to suggest a trap, a conflict where there really is no conflict. And so the Pope in that discourse mentioned that the Church at Vatican II had to deal with, and he listed several questions. The relationship between the sciences and faith, particularly the historical sciences, with all the discoveries of the archaeology of history of the Middle East. And so this had an impact on the reading of Scripture, and we have the Dei Verbum as a result. The relationship of the Church to the modern state, and the question of religious liberty. If we're aware that in the 19th century, religious liberty was understood as an act of the intellect, that the intellect can be free from truth, and the Church was saying, no, this is madness. Whereas in the 20th century, religious liberty is understood as an act of the will, that the will is not to be forced by external pressure. The Church has always said that faith has to be a free act. So the angle of approach is different, but basically the teaching is the same. So Vatican II tried to undo certain resistances to the faith that were present in the Western world. Now, I found a discourse of Albino Luciani, the future John Paul I, who as a young bishop, when the council was called, spoke to his priests. And Luciani said that the fruits of the council will be sanctity, but that may come after a long period of difficulties, of misunderstandings and so on. So the question of how do we read Vatican II, the Pope here gave a very clear line of interpretation.
Coming up next, are the bishops in a box? And also warm remembrances of a church leader as Currents continues. News of the Pope's pilgrimage to Bulgaria is the latest addition to a very busy schedule. And all the while, the Holy Father is presiding over the Year of Faith, the foundation for the new evangelization. We're about a third of the way through the year, so it's a good time for an update.
It's been about 4 months now since the Pope launched the Year of Faith. So the basic question is, how are things going so far? Well, Archbishop Rino Fisichella says the initiative is meeting its goals by renewing and strengthening the faith of Christians. There's a lot of enthusiasm surrounding the Year of Faith. Above all, it's an enthusiasm we can actually see in Christian communities, so in dioceses, parishes, lay movements, and associations. It's an opportunity to reflect on the role faith plays and why it's important in people's lives. The Year of Faith started on October 11th, which actually coincided with the 50th anniversary of the start of the Second Vatican Council. The Year of Faith will run until November 24th, but there are still many surprises in store. There will be an important concert held on June 22nd. For the first time, a classical concert will be held in St. Peter's Square, and it's open to the public. Everyone's invited so they can enjoy the beauty of music. Part of the Year of Faith is emphasizing how culture, art, and music can inspire and become tools for the new evangelization. And so, as part of this, the Vatican has organized several exhibits. One of them is in Castel Sant'Angelo. I'm sure that an exhibit like this about the Christian faith can be an invitation to actually reflect on the faith itself. In addition to different pilgrimages and exhibits on religious art, the Year of Faith is also about reflecting on the sacraments. And so on April 28th, 40 youths from around the world will receive the sacrament of confirmation from the Pope himself.
And the Holy Father will be with more than 1 million young people this summer when he travels to Rio de Janeiro for World Youth Day. America's bishops are facing a dilemma tonight as they advocate for reform of our nation's immigration laws. For years, the bishops have championed the cause of immigrants while striving to keep families together. The Obama administration's proposals, meantime, call for any new immigration laws to recognize homosexual and lesbian couples. The Catholic leaders have sent a private protest letter to the president. The spokeswoman for the bishops' conference says the president's support for same-sex couples jeopardizes passage of the immigration bill. Well, bringing immigrants into the Catholic flock raises questions of how to best integrate different languages and cultures. Today, Latino Catholics are the fastest growing Catholic demographic. To meet the challenge of building the church, there is a wealth of experience to draw on, coming from the other side of the country and from many years ago.
You hear battles in the traditional Catholic dioceses back in the East Coast about what to do with Hispanic immigrants that are now starting to come to not just the Southwest, but all over the country. The sound of the whole issue was exactly like what I remember in the 70s and the 80s here in Southern California. We dealt with that 30 years ago. Now the rest of the country is looking at the issue now. It's a bit of a relief to realize, yeah, we've been there. Glad that's a little bit behind us.
It's a multicultural church. The faces of Catholicism literally are very, very diverse. And we've worked really hard here in the Diocese of Orange to help that diversity not become divisive, but rather to be unified. So a number of our priests are bilingual, Spanish-speaking, English-speaking, English-speaking, Vietnamese-speaking, Vietnamese-speaking, Spanish-speaking. That is the way that we have worked here in the Diocese of Orange to create parishes that aren't, 3 or 4 separate parishes because of the cultural diversity, but are united parishes.
The Bishop of Fort Wayne, South Bend, Bishop John DArcy, succeeded in the work of uniting his diocese, the proof coming at a memorial service for him after he lost a battle with cancer.
If Bishop Emeritus DArcy suffered through his final days, Wednesday morning was all about celebrating his 80 years. Around 200 parishioners filled St. Matt's Cathedral in South Bend to receive the bishop's body. Some took off work.
He was a man of his word and that he loved the church and his faith.
While others were dismissed from class.
He did so much for our community, like it's good to do something for him, like honor him in a way. So it's just kind of like a thank you.
Each person clung on to a chapter in the bishop's biography. People like Megan Swaim.
He wanted to know people, he wanted to know their stories. He remembered people and remembered their stories. And so there's just a generosity in him that was apparent to everyone.
Singing in choir during high school, Swaim instantly connected with the bishop. He confirmed her, marched in Washington, D.C. with her, and in November, performed her wedding it would be his last.
He celebrated our wedding in Fort Wayne at the cathedral there on November 30th, which was just a few weeks before he went to Boston and then received his diagnosis.
Swaim and her husband Josh were honeymooning in Rome when they learned the news and turned to prayer.
I think I'll remember his ornery smile. I remember the kindness in his eyes, but I think especially I'll always remember what he looked like on our wedding day, as he hugged each of us and congratulated us, as he listened to us say our vows. I think that like the day of my wedding is probably going to be like the single greatest memory that I have of Bishop and will carry with me forever.
Bishop DArcy led the diocese for 25 years. A massive Christian burial will be celebrated tomorrow. Finally, our regular feature, the School of the Week. Tonight, we take a look back to a special school where the power of two came together to create a greater one.
We are grateful to have two very fine saints watching over us daily. St. Catherine, we represent by a flame, because of one of the things that she said was, if you are what you should be, you would set the world ablaze. And it's what we want for our children. St. Therese is represented by the rose. And her quote is, do ordinary things in extraordinary ways. Our primary goal is to journey with a child so that they develop a relationship with Christ. That is our essence. It's why we do what we do.
There were 6 schools or 7 schools in this East Flatbush cluster. And then slowly, year after year, another one left and another one closed and reopened to something else and closed.
We knew that the writing was on the wall because our registrations kept going down. In an effort to keep Catholic education alive in this particular area of East Flatbush, the only answer would be to merge 2 schools together.
Now, of course, that meant you had to meld somehow these 2 different ways that the 2 different schools actually did work. I did have to change subjects completely. I did math at St. Catherine's. I do science now. So it is interesting, and it was different, and it was challenging. But, you know, I love the job. I love teaching. So I just changed accordingly.
There's been a lot of negative stories about Catholic school closing, and we heard all the time in the press about the schools closing. But if you really listened to what we were told, which was about, quote unquote, preserving the vision, and preserving the vision really was that, yes, we do have our sights on maintaining Catholic education. Is it still feasible to keep the same model? No, it wasn't feasible. In order for it to continue, then we would have to sort of change our model and our method.
My tagline is Catholic School of Excellence in East Flatbush. The academics in both schools were excellent.
And both schools had very similar visions.
Education is not something static. It's not something that you stop. It's dynamic and it changes all the time. So it made sense.
We're trying to have the students understand that they are learning for life. We're only with them a brief period, and then they're going on. And hopefully what they're getting here will see them through high school and beyond.
I really love seeing all the children. We had a fairly decent enrollment of, I think it was 240 or something like that. Now we're close to 400.
They all have dreams. We have to help them fulfill some of those dreams.
I think we are on the right road. I see happy children, which is the most important thing. I see content parents. I see happy faculty.
It does keep the dream alive.
I'm always amazed when children who are not necessarily baptized Catholic want to become Catholic. And when we witness their baptism at Easter, that's more than a salary. That's our goal. It will continue because there are always people searching for an education that is not only excellent, but value-based.
And thank you for joining us tonight. We leave you with the wonderful voice of Andrea Bocelli at this morning's National Prayer Breakfast. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Fabulous. Have a good night.
Belle del mio platano amato, per voi risplenda il fato. Tuoni lampi e procelle non voltraggino mai la cara pace, né giunga a profanarvi austro rapace.